Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cooper. I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
I'm very impressed with what you as a state and you as producers have going on. It's humbling to be here standing in front of you. Every single producer I've talked to has been jaw-droppingly progressive, pushing the envelope. To me, that's very refreshing. Just with my value set and my perspective and my view of the world, that's what needs to be happening. And so, just a short note, this photo, I meant to have it in later on in the presentation, so keep this in mind. I'll refer to it later on in the presentation. A little bit about myself. I'm fifth generation. My family has a ranch in west central Montana. I grew up outside of Helena and spending summers on the ranch. And I understood at a very young age what I needed to do, what I had to do, what I wanted to do, which was to go home to this very special place and shepherd it forward into the future. That's my calling. And so I had this freakish intensity to study and learn how I, as a fifth generation, can take this place to the sixth generation. Because as a late teenager, before going to study ag business in college, the writing was on the wall. We've all heard it in many of these talks. There's economic pressures. I mean, before I came home, input costs had risen 40% in the 2000s before I went home. Meanwhile, commodity prices had stayed the same, so you're getting some serious economic pressure. 1980 to 2000, we have a weather station at the ranch, and the average annual precipitation was 22 inches. And first decade of the 2000s, it was 16 and a half. So you're getting environmental pressure in your ability to grow forage, which is then your ability to generate revenue. And then meanwhile, there's a mass exodus of people leaving the land. And how do you recruit people back onto the land in a way where they're empowered and a part of it? And so I saw the writing on the wall. When I was in college, I was fortunate enough to attend a holistic management course, and that changed my life. I understood that there was a real key there with holistic grazing and what could be done to where you could take all these things that I just mentioned that are out of our control and leverage it to where you can exert some control over the uncontrollable. And what I mean by that, the common denominator behind all of these, and something I got really, really excited about and traveled the world for 4 years working on ranches, studying people who were actually doing this, was grazing. Grazing is the lowest hanging fruit, I think, with what we can do on rangelands to change things, to change our bottom line, to change the amount of grass that we produce, to build resiliency into the entire system, and to do so in a way that attracts people back to the landscape. And so with the 40 minutes that I've got, I'm going to just kind of gloss over things. My goal is to really communicate clearly, hopefully, what we're doing and why. And so in order to do that, I'm going to paint the picture of Stephen Livestock Company. So this is my family's ranch. This is the main basin. We range from 4,200 to 7,800 feet in elevation. So there's 3 different zones. And if you're to map these 3 zones out from a resource-based standpoint, our winter zone would be at the bottom, transition zone, and summer grass. And from a resource-based standpoint, we're an inverted pyramid. Our chokehold, our bottleneck is this winter zone. It's about 10% of our acreage. And so that dictated how many cattle we could run. So that's where we became very, very focused on what can we do with grazing. And so in 2024 years ago, my Uncle Chase and my dad and Uncle Whit and the ranch team at the time decided to make the big leap and change our calving from February and March to middle of May, that then became June 10th. There's no such thing as a perfect calving date for us when we have a 3-month growing season. It's never, anyway, there's a lot of variables at play, but we're at May 28th currently. But what that means is during the winter, Our cows are in their second and third trimester, their lowest nutritional demands. And that helps match that inverse pyramid that I was talking about. And so fast forward 8 years ago, I was introduced to Johann Zeitzman and his teachings. His book, Man, Cattle, and Veld, is one of the best books on ranching that it's had the most impact on me. And he introduced me to this concept, non-selective grazing. And I was a total grazing geek. I'd been exposed to everything. I'd been experimenting at home with a bunch of different styles of grazing. And this to me made the most sense. And so what I mean by non-selective grazing is grazing in a way where every single plant is affected. It's either grazed or it's trampled. And when you do that, you put all plants on a level playing field. And when all plants are put on a level playing field, the plants that outcompete and succeed in that scenario are the plants with the deepest root systems and the most amount of leaf area. And those more often than not are your desirable species. For us, that's our ref fescue, that's our pinnacle species. And so by grazing in this manner, you're setting up your desirables for success. Whereas selective grazing, they'll go around and find the plant with the highest bricks content and usually take it down close to the ground, and meanwhile, the plant with the lower bricks content, which would more often than not be an annual species right next to it, they might clip the top of it or not touch it. Well, this undesirable species that wasn't quite grazed is now set up for success in relation to your desirable species that was grazed down. And so in order to do that, in order to graze non-selectively in a way that doesn't compromise animal performance, you have to do it quickly. In order to do it quickly and have a non-selective grazing event, you have to do it in super high densities. And so a byproduct of that is, it must be autocorrect on here, Bart. It's supposed to be armor. You owe me a drink, not litter. But I will say litter eventually out of habit, so I also owe you a drink. But a byproduct by grazing in that manner, super high density, very quick, is not only are you laying down this litter, but it's a different quality of litter. You're not just laying it down. It's getting pushed into the soil, which kickstarts the decomposition process and returns those nutrients to the soil instead of those nutrients in that organic matter being oxidized into the atmosphere. And so when you lay that litter down, you're moderating the soil temperature, you're armoring the soil surface, you're decreasing the amount of evaporation, and by doing so, you're extending your growing season. So now you're growing more grass. And then by having that higher quality of litter or armor, and kickstarting that decomposition process, returning more nutrients into the soil, you're enhancing your nutrient cycling, which also then grows more grass. And in time, if you're grazing non-selectively and you're selecting for your desirable species, by doing so, you're growing more grass that inherently are more resistant to drought, because all of this is about building in resiliency, right? You're more resistant to drought, it's a longer growing season. So then more photosynthesis is happening, more carbon is being sequestered, more sugar is being secreted in the soil, more microbial life is being fed. It's this upward spiral that you're capturing and you get to ride. And then we do that and we follow it with longer rest periods. And by default, by doing a non-selective grazing event, you immediately increase your harvest efficiency, which increases the amount of forage that you have. And so you can, in time, increase your stocking rate. And stocking rate is the #1 driver of profitability on a ranch. So you see why I was so excited about this. And so we did an experiment. I'm a big fan of a phrase that I stole from Burke Teichert, which is fail fast, fail cheap, fail forward. So anything we want to experiment with, we adhere to that. And so we set up a one-day non-selective grazing event on the right. This is my Uncle Chase. He's managed the ranch for 50 years. He was coming to see what things I was screwing up now. So we went back, one day graze on the right, non-selective grazing event, 2.5 day graze on the left. This is in the winter grazing. And here is a photo that I took and I pointed down. You can see there's 0 bare soil. You can see the amount of armor on the soil surface. You can see the amount of manure that's not just laid down, but actually trampled in. So again, fertilizing. And then here's a photo 30, 40 days later. Look at that fence line contrast right there. Here he is standing on where the polywire was. Here's that photo again. When I saw that, that was Mother Nature telling me how she wanted to be grazed. That's it. And then I got the feedback loop on what it did to us and our ability to harvest forage. We do it in cow days per acre, CDAs, stock days per acre, ADAs. Immediately, the moment we go to non-selective grazing, it increases 30 to 70%. Once I understood those numbers, I knew that it was something that we had to do.
Just in case not everybody's keyed in on what you're seeing there, what you're seeing.
Oh, so thank you. So on the line right here, where the fence was, these dark green plants, those are our rough fescues. That's our pinnacle species. And in that non-selective graze, these were taken down with like a #1 buzz cut. I mean, totally taken off. See that deep, dark, rich green? Those plants are throwing a party. They absolutely loved that treatment. And then meanwhile, see this patch over here? That's cheatgrass. We didn't have the cheatgrass on this side, which goes to the hypothesis earlier of selecting your desirables and hindering basically your undesirable species. Does that make sense? So here's one of those rough fescue plants after it had fully matured. That's like a 5-inch crown on that palm leaf hat right there. Here's another fence line photo. This is a laneway to water on the right, and it's mountain brome, which is a native, and orchard grass, which is not. And then what's on the left is all Canadian thistle. What was on the left was a 2-day graze. The right was a laneway to water, got totally hammered. So that just demonstrates the power of animal impact. And in case you guys need some more demonstrations of what a good fence line photo looks like, I'm a big fan of fence line contrast photos. Here's another one. My wife has a good sense of humor. She snapped this, and she thought I would be embarrassed, but I proudly rock my rancher tan. You can see the amount of nutrients and photosynthesis happening. It's very alive, whereas over here it looks like it's about ready to die. I texted that photo to an old high school buddy of mine. He apparently doesn't appreciate fence line contrast because he just wrote back gross. So anyway, we did that. It's been 8 years now. We're in our 8th winter of doing this during winter grazing, which I'll get into a little bit more. And in 8 years, we increased our forage harvest rate and productivity by 200% in the winter zone. And again, that was that chokehold of our ability to grow as an operation. What that means is we were just handed 2 more winter zones just from changing our winter grazing practices and our grazing management and how we saw things and how we were ability to adapt and learn and be honest with what we're seeing and be willing to experiment in this fail fast, fail cheap, fail forward mentality. The biggest win, this goes back to, remember that earlier photo that I opened up with? Historically, we got 16 cow days per acre. Again, that's a measurement of the volume of feed. That means 16 cows could stay on 1 acre for 1 day. This year, that photo I snapped, that's a herd of our coming 2 and coming 3-year-olds. It's 611 head. We're moving them 2 to 4 times a day on supplement. And they were harvesting on average 155 cow days per acre, which is an 840% increase over the historical average. And to make that even more encouraging, this happened in the driest decade in the history of the ranch. So we're growing more with less. We're taking control over what we like. don't really have control over. And I've been struggling with ways to communicate to people how big this is for us. This is monumental towards that goal of mine of carrying this ranch forward and shepherding it towards the 6th generation. So we were handed 2 more winter zones. We don't know what our stocking rate is anymore. We don't know what the ceiling is. I have all sorts of projections on spreadsheets, but we don't know what the true ceiling is. Last year, hay in our part of the world cost $300 a ton. And if you were to put that opportunity cost on what we're doing with our winter grazing, we had a hay savings of $530 per head. And that herd was 1,300 head. This year, with the current hay costs of about $165 a ton by the time it's delivered, it's $266 per head in savings. Another way to say it, if we were to do this type of grazing the rest of the calendar year, which we don't do what I'm going to explain more in depth here for the rest of the calendar year for certain reasons. But if we were, we know that it's possible. If we were, the county average takes 26 acres to run 1 cow for 1 year. If we were to prorate their animal units for the rest of the calendar year, we would only need 4.2 acres to run 1 cow. And proof is in the pudding. So in 2021, it was one of our hottest and driest years on record. Our neighbors had to destock 20 to 40%. This herd was 26% bigger. And not only that, while we're winter grazing, they're gaining body condition. And we're continuing to beat our harvest rate records. Which proves how we've been grazing and the genetics we've been selecting for are working. So in 2021, we wintered 1,030 cows, 200 pounds of hay to get them through storms, no supplement. They gained 3/4 of body condition between December and April. 2022, 1,300 cows, 330 pounds of hay, which is about the same as what we fed last year. They gained 3/4 of a pound. And if you put that, 3/4 of body condition score, 1 body condition score is approximately 100 pounds. Over that length of time between December and April, that's 2/3 of a pound average daily gain on these cows. No supplement. You'll notice that I left 2023 out. It's because we were super confident after coming out of 2022. We were very humbled last year. That was a really hard winter. And what made it super tough from a winter grazing standpoint was the growing season in our winter zone was horrible. We didn't have much organic matter. And then we had really, really good rains in the fall and had about 10-inch green up. Well, the green to old feed ratio was way out of whack. It was great. Those cows were grazing washy feed all winter. We could not keep them satiated. We couldn't keep them full. We couldn't keep them happy. It was super tough. So grazing principles for animal performance that we've come by honestly. Fresh feed as frequently as possible. So what we're doing is we're moving our cows every single day in the winter. Winter for us is December 15th to May 15th. And by our cows, that's the 4-year-olds and up. That's the mob. The younger cows we're moving 2 to 4 times a day. And the thing with the fresh feed is possible, and the next one was a huge light bulb moment for us. This move them when you're full. That's how we're able to get them to gain condition over the winter. This competitive mob mentality, frenetic behavior that you hear about, which is very real, that happens when you're moving your cows when they're when they're hungry, and they start to get frantic, and they start to dictate the situation, and you show up, and it's just you're immediately stressed because they're stressed, and it's a horrible situation, and they're dictating how the day is going to go. You can take that same competitive instinct and mob mentality and leverage it for your benefit. And so when we move them when they're full, when they're laying down ruminating, but we have the grazing impact that we need, they want to get to that piece of grass before the next cow does. So we're force feeding them. They're grazing more than they otherwise would if we weren't involved. And so Johann Zeitzman, who I'm a big follower of, he's really big on genetic high relative intake, so the amount of forage that a cow eats in relation to her body size. You can influence that with management as well, which is what we're doing. Feeding on the front end of storms, it's very easy to get sucked into this conservation mindset. I'm very guilty of it. I did this many times of where, oh, we'll just see how bad the storm is and then we'll feed them. By the time, if you do that, at least for us, by the time you decide we better get out there and feed them, you're way too late. You lost body condition. And when you're in this model, body condition is the name of the game. Low stress livestock handling, we're avid followers of Bud Williams and have been for 20 years. We're very tuned in to our cows' emotional well-being. If she's not happy, she's not going to be grazing. If she's not grazing, she's not going to be putting on body condition. It's very, very important to us. And they need to trust us. They need to look to us for leadership, and the more hours in the day that they can be grazing and that they aren't stressed, the better. And for us, in this type of non-selective grazing, I know people are, Doug, people are saying, or having cows eating snow works for some people when they're bale grazing, higher nutritive plain. For us, when we're non-selective grazing, native forage, they have to have adequate water. We've killed cows by not making adequate water available. I posted one cow and her abomasum was just, who died, and there's 2 feet of wet snow on the ground, and they weren't going into water. It's like, oh, they'll be fine. We had 3 cows die. I cut one open. 2 of them, I cut 2 open. Her abomasum was just chock full of dried feed. She was dehydrated. So very, very, very crucial in this type of a model. Ecological grazing principles that we follow, non-selective grazing whenever it's feasible. It's not always feasible, but whenever it's feasible, from what we've seen, that's the right thing to do, and then followed by long periods of rest. For us, that's at least a year in our environment. And this 1-2 punch covers and builds soil. You select for your desirable species, which lengthens your growing season. You increase your harvest efficiency. You increase your forage productivity. You're capturing more water, recycling more nutrients. You're capturing more energy and photosynthesis. And all of this leads to an increased stocking rate, which leads to financial resiliency. So how are we doing this? We start out, well, everyone here, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys about polywire. We clearly use a lot of help. But polywire, our favorite tools for the type of country that we run in is this Gallagher turbo wire. We've had some that's lasted 20 years, and there's 4,500 head of elk in the area. It's seen a lot of abuse, but it still carries a spark. We rig up these, we build these polywire electric reels that we have in our side-by-sides. That makes the job a lot easier. I'm a big fan of these 3/8" fiberglass posts, no clips. We just do one wrap, every 3rd post, a 1/2 hitch. And then that way, you know, in the summer, we'll have 14.5 miles of poly up at any given time. We have 8 management groups. So, and these pastures will be 8, 12 miles away. So you've got to be able to pack a lot of stuff on a 4-wheeler. You can take miles worth of these posts on one 4-wheeler. Those clips get hung up. Those clips also, if antelope smoke that wire and they go ripping through those clips, you'll fray a lot of the metal strands. So that's why I prefer not to have any clips. The pigtails, they get all tangled together, and our soil's rocky enough we can't step them in anyways. So anyway, how we're doing it, we start out at a water point, which would be way over here on the right. And we graze there, and then we build our next graze away, and we simply, like this would be the next day's feed ration. And we just build the polywire at that next ration, and we roll this one up to give access to it, and then they just go back to water. And we're grazing in such high density that ground is so fouled, there's very little to no backpicking when they're coming back from water. Here's another example. It looks like there's a fence there. There isn't. That's just what we rolled up. Here it is from a distance. That water's about 2/3 of a mile away over here. Here's another another photo. Again, it looks like there's a fence there. There's not. That's just where the fence was that we rolled up to give access to that day's feed. The water's on the backside of that rocky reef there, and we're just marching away from it. So what have we seen with this in our monitoring? In 5 years, again, in that driest decade in the history of the ranch, on average, our bare soil went from 8% to 0%, and our most drastic change was from 26% to 2%. We have 28 monitoring transects around the ranch, and it's all read by a third party, and he asked if he could do a Haney soil health test. I said, sure, and he got back to us with the results, and he did it on, it was 25 or 27 ranches around the West. The highest organic matter percentage that any of the other ranches had was at 4.5%, and our average was at 10.5%. It ranged between 8 and 16.5 on native rangeland. And here's this photo just gives you a good visual of how that's all working. Look at that amount of armor laid down on the soil surface, pressed into the ground, and you can just imagine what's happening there. And so 8 years ago, when we started doing this, it became glaringly obvious that genetics were our weak link. Our grazing management had outpaced our genetics. So here I'd had this hyper focus on grazing. All of a sudden, I got this hyper focus on grazing management. And so we raise a lot of home-raised bulls now. Probably 90% of our bull battery are home-raised. These are some home-raised black composite bulls in the front. And again, I was very influenced by Johann Zeitzman, and he says a cow has a dual purpose role. One is to improve the ground she's grazing, and two is to efficiently convert grass into beef. And if you're really going to improve in a fast way the ground she's grazing, that takes a totally different type of cow than the majority of the cattle that are out there and have been selected for the last 4 decades. And so we started selecting our own bulls, and we developed a 2-prong approach. The first one is out of our mature cows, 6 years old and up. And what we're trying to do with that is capture longevity. And longevity is just a function of fertility, especially if you define fertility as not only breeding, but successfully holding that fetus, calving successfully, raising that calf, and weaning that calf that following year. And so this cow right here is a 12-year-old. I don't care what the bull calf looks like. It's very easy for people to get sucked into big calves, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that correlates with growthy genetics, which run contradictory to a lot of other functional range-based genetics that you need. And so we look for cows 6 years old and up. First cycle, we go out on horseback and we look for these types of cows so that she's got a calf in the first cycle. Body condition 6, slicked off hair coat, good udder, good feet, moderate to smaller frame, good mothering instinct, and I don't care what the calf looks like. If he's out of that cow, he gets a tag in the left ear because we brand on the left side. And at branding, that calf stays intact. And then the second pronged approach is what I call the elite of the elite. So what we do here, these are first calf heifers, calving first calf heifers. They start calving May 28th. We drop bulls in at the end of June. Well, let me back up. May 28th, bull battery, normal bull battery goes out August 17th, okay? We drop bulls in at the end of June, and we pull them at the end of July. And then the rest of the bull battery goes in August 17th. So what happens there are these 2-year-olds who are freakishly fertile, conceived to these bulls, and they calve the following April. Those are the most fertile genetics in that entire peer group. And we've had great success with that program. Some of our best bulls that we've raised are out of that program. And so we capture those most fertile genetics, and we cast them out over the rest of our herd to create that snowball effect. And on top of that, we've been big believers in composites and the science behind composites. This is science that's been out of the Meat Animal Research Center since the 1980s, and it's crazy to me that no one is utilizing this more than they are. So the real strength behind composites are if you had a F1 cross, so a Black Angus and a Hereford, you have that black baldy calf, they have 100% heterosis, that's the hybrid vigor. But then when that calf grows up and has another calf, it only has 50% heterosis. So that hybrid vigor is diluted by half with each consecutive generation. However, if you get enough genetic variability, so a true composite or 5 or more breeds under the same hide, you capture that heterosis and it doesn't get diluted from one generation to the next. And not only do you capture that heterosis, but you're able to mix and match breeds for the best type of breed that matches your environment. And so we started creating our own composite that we're calling the Sebin composite, and we've broken it out into different phases. Phase 1 is we bring an outside breed and put it on top of these composites that we've already been raising. We've been buying black composite bulls since 2006. So our herd is already a well-established composite herd. And then phase 2, we stack composites on top of composites. So one interesting thing that they found with the science that came out of Meat Animal Research Center is that the more breeds you get into that composite, and the more you stack those breeds on top of each other, it tightens the bell curve for genetic expression. So the more breeds under the same hide, the more uniform calf crop you'll have. And they found that a true composite will be more genetically uniform than a purebred herd. I don't understand how. It doesn't make sense. But, so phase 2 is we're taking these composites and stacking them on top of composites, which then theoretically should tighten that bell curve. And from what we've seen subjectively on the ground, that's exactly what's happened. It's absolutely incredible. And so, just the power of heterosis, real quick. Ag economist out of Kansas, spacing his name, he put a dollar figure to it, and he said a composite cow, or like a F1 cross cow, will bring $230 more of revenue to your bottom line that equates to higher milking ability, higher durability on grass, more disease resistance in their calves, higher longevity, more fertile. Everything that impacts your bottom line increases. So this is the first breed we brought in to create our own composite. It's called Aubrac, which is from France. Really high meat-to-bone ratio, early sexual maturity, which is when we select our bulls, we do a vertical hip height measurement to individual weight, which measures how many pounds of meat per vertical inch, higher meat-to-bone ratio, which correlates with early sexual maturity, which is fertility, body condition, doability on grass, range functionality. Here's a half-blood. So we took that Aubrac bull, we put them in early on our calving first calf heifers from that second prong that I was telling you about. Here's a half-blood Aubrac bull, yearling bull that we put in early on our calving first calf heifers. Then we got a bunch of quarter bloods. Here's another half-blood cow, first calf heifer. They're always in body condition 6. And then we did phase 2 where we're stacking these composites on top of composites. Here's an 8-month-old bull calf. And then phase 3, we're thinking of bringing in Drakensberger, which is a breed from South Africa, the Drakensberg Mountains of South Africa. That semen just became available in the States. And so once we're ready for phase 3, we think we're going to go possibly this route as an experiment. I'm going to cruise. I was really proud of our grass-fed genetics, Glenn, until I saw your photos. But we're tracking everything from grass-fed, how they perform in the feedlot, what carcass traits are in the feedlot, just to make sure that every single thing, every single characteristic that's important to us is moving in a positive direction. Anyway, marrying functional genetics with non-selective grazing, I believe, creates a win-win-win. We're increasing our productivity, ecological performance. We're increasing our stocking rate and therefore, hopefully, our bottom line. We're empowering people. This is our cow boss who does all the winter grazing, and he says, this is a cowboy's cowboy. He'd never done this until he came to work with us. And now he says that he's changing the world one bite at a time. We're hosting winter grazing workshops. I've gone around and given these types of presentations, and people are pretty amped up, but I don't think they go home and really make changes. So we try and have 3 to 4 winter grazing workshops at the ranch, you know, full transparency. You come and see it. We talk about our grazing history, train people to how to develop their eye, how to do the calculations, how to figure out how big of a paddock to give them. And it seems like there's a 60 to 80% adoption rate of people going home and at least trying stuff, which is really encouraging. Here's another winter grazing workshop. And I believe I'm out of time, but all of that to the end of keeping it in the family and moving towards in the future. So thank you.